Lost Art with Andrew Cox, retired Master Gunnery Sergeant. thelostart.podbean.com. Get some merchandise and help support the podcast in getting our veteran voices out for all to hear. Now on all major podcast platforms. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Be a guest, tell your veteran story, discuss your veteran business or organization. Email The Lost Art with Andrew Cox at gmail.com. Andrew Cox, a Till Valhalla Project Ambassador. See the project story at tillvalhallaproject.com. Thanks for tuning in. Please enjoy the podcast that's giving a voice to our veterans. The Lost Art with Andrew Cox.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Lost Art Podcast, that podcast giving a voice to our veterans. I'm your host, Andrew Cox, and today we're having a My Veteran Story with Roger Vogel. But before we get into that, are you enjoying the podcast? And make sure you go to our website. That's thelostart.podbean.com. Go check it out. See what's going on there. We do have a merchandise tab. Click on that tab. You can go in there and get you a cool hat, get you a cool shirt, get you something, help support us and getting our veteran voices out for all to hear. Also want to give a shout out to the Till Valhalla Project and all the things that they got going on. Absolutely amazing. They were gracious enough to allow me to be an ambassador for them. So please reach out. Go and check out their website. That's tillvalhallaproject.com. Go check it out and see what they got going on. If you can help them, please do so. All right, with that, I have Roger here. Roger, how you doing?
I'm doing so good, AJ. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you again. You're not quite a regular necessarily on the podcast, but you've come on a couple of times. So it's always fun to see you.
It's always nice to be able to talk to a Marine. I mean, what can I say?
Yeah. I'll try not to give you too many crayons as we go through this. I know you like to give me a hard time about that, but that's all good.
Well, to be fair, it's not just you. It's, all Marines. So
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. We're all in the same boat. It's all good. So let's start it for you at the beginning. Like, where did you grow up? Tell me a little bit about that, and then what drew you into military service?
yeah, perfect. So I'm an Army brat. My dad was a air defense artillery officer for most of his career. So he came in '74, graduated from Ohio State, came in at the very tail end of Vietnam. He ended up not going overseas. Things were basically winding down as he came in. So he married his college sweetheart, my mother. They got married right out of college from the Ohio State University, and immediately reported to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, home of the airborne. And he was in the 82nd Airborne Division as a young second lieutenant. And my sister was born, who's several years older than me. They kind of bounced around a little bit, and he ended up in Fort Bliss, which is in El Paso area, West Texas, which is the
Yeah.
Air Defense Artillery School. They still do
Oh,
some
okay.
of the schooling out there, but a lot of that's been consolidated at Fort Sill now. But back then,
Huh.
it was all at El Paso area, so that's where I was born. And
Okay.
then after that, we proceeded when I was a young kinder, we PCS to West Germany
Ooh.
and did that for a few years, and then returned to Fort Bragg. Returned for them, not for me. Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Right.
And Dad did that for a couple years, and then he got his last PCS because he knew he was going to retire at his last duty station
Okay.
to U.S. Space Command, which is in Cheyenne Mountain there in Colorado Springs. I know
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff with the creation of the Space Force. Peterson Air Force Base has been reflagged as a Space Force base now, so they've moved some
Right.
things around since then. But anyway, so we moved to Colorado Springs and lived out there, and Dad basically retired there. And just kind of note, we left Fayetteville Fort Bragg here right as Desert Storm was kicking off. So
Oh, no
Dad
kidding.
was
Wow.
upset because he thought he was missing, because he wanted to go with 18th Airborne Corps and go do Desert Storm stuff. But what he didn't know was when he reported into Cheyenne Mountain in the Missile Warning Center there at Space Command, he ended up being the watch officer for this, during all the Scud launches during the Missile Warning
Oh,
Center
wow.
time. So um, he ended up being more involved than he thought he was going to be, just not in the way, that's how life works, right? You end up being
Right.
waist deep in this, and not in any way that you thought. So
Right.
Dad retired there in Colorado Springs, and we returned back here to the Fayetteville Fort Bragg area, and that's freshly retired. Dad became a school teacher, and I ended up doing my 1 or 2 years of middle school and then high school. So that's kind of the Army brat years. I know you've met my associate, Mr. Dan Baker.
That's right.
He was in and out of the picture during many of those uh, Fort Bragg uh, times that we were living here. So we were good friends as kids, and we peeled away for years, and then came back, and then basically did high school together, and then peeled away, and then chased each other around our careers.
Right.
So that's the through line through all that. So childhood. So yeah, dad was retired from the Army by the time I think I was a rising seventh grader. So
Mhm.
most of my young years he was in, but my middle school / junior high and high school he was out by then. So did high school here in the Fayetteville Fort Bragg area, home of the Airborne Special Operations, of course, center of the universe for all the Marines out there. Not too far from Lejeune, by the way. So we're I don't know,
That's true. That's true.
maybe 2 hours, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe a
Yeah,
little more, but
kind of
around that.
Jacksonville area. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm winding down probably my junior year of high school, and I'm a
Hmm.
reasonably intelligent kid. Like I of course I don't try hard enough, um, but I'm reasonably intelligent, and I can just kind of get by with B's, just kind of putting in half effort. And I'm kind of an athlete. I mean, I'm definitely an athlete. I wanted to play football. I wasn't big enough to play football, so I basically did everything
Mm.
else instead. I ran track, cross country, and indoor track. I played
Oh,
ice
wow.
hockey because Fayetteville, Fort Bragg. Well, at the time, Fort Bragg had a league that they played out of the Fort Bragg rink there, so I got to play ice hockey even though I was living in North Carolina. This was back before it was cool.
Yeah.
So I was playing all these sports, and I was very involved with the Boy Scouts. I got my Eagle Scout my senior year, so I loved being outdoors. I loved leadership. I loved doing all that stuff, and I didn't have any burning desire to. I didn't have any burning desire for a particular career field that I wanted to get into, and so we kind
Hmm.
of get into the lead edge of my senior year of high school, and a lot of the guys I'm friends with are, and Dan's already done graduated and moved off, and he's off in the Balkans doing Balkan stuff. So my best friend's
Yeah.
over there doing that, and I'm looking around, and I just hey, I just got accepted to UNC, a full ride scholarship to UNC to go be a math nerd. Oh, hey, I just got a full ride to NC State to go be a scientist, and I'm seeing all these people have all these big plans, and like good on them. And
Yeah.
I didn't have this. It was weird. Like the thing that I wanted to do the most in the world, and God love my parents. Like I have amazing parents who raised me to be independent and take care of myself, and they did everything right, and almost too right. Because by the time my junior year of high school was over, I mean I was ready to take off, and it wasn't trying to get out of a bad situation. It was just I wanted to spread my wings and fly, right?
Right. Yeah.
And my senior year of high school rolls around, and I'm just not motivated to go do the college track. And again, I
Hmm.
keep mentioning growing up here in Fayetteville, right? Back in the 90s, I don't know how it was for you, but back in the 90s in a military town, when you went to your high school guidance counselor, they were like, you either go to college or you enlist in the military. There was no real, option C, right?
Right.
So I was like, well, I don't want to go to college. The last thing in the world I want to do right now is 4 more years of, formal, I'm putting that in air quotes, formal education, right? So
Right.
uh, I started talking to recruiters. And, my
Okay.
dad's an old airborne ranger. And so I went and talked to an Army recruiter and wasn't particularly impressed. This would have been probably the fall of 1999, just to kind of put you in a time window there.
Okay.
So I'm sports, doing all things. I went and talked to a Navy recruiter because I figured, hey, if I'm gonna do military stuff, I want to do the cool stuff, right? So Navy SEAL,
Yeah.
right? Everybody wants to
Right.
be a Navy SEAL, right? And so I went and came home with some literature from the Navy recruiter, and my dad about hit the roof, man. Um,
That makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I went and saw a Marine recruiter as well, and kind of similar. Hey, you want to go be Marine infantryman. I don't know if you're good enough, but perfect reverse psychology. Totally
Right.
works on
Yeah.
18-year-old, motivated 18-year-olds. Right. Totally works. And my dad, and you'll like this as a Marine. My dad said, look, if you're gonna join the military, if you want to go be do infantry, if that's what you want to do, the
Right.
Marines are awesome at it. God bless them, they're awesome at it. If you want to do it and do it right, join the Army because they have better equipment.
Well, that
And
is
he
a true
wasn't
statement.
wrong.
They
I
do
mean,
have better equipment.
and, he said, hey, the Marines, God bless them, are always the second fiddle to the Navy. And so the Navy takes care of themselves first and the Marines get the
Yeah.
leftovers. And that might be a little bit of an oversimplification, but he wasn't wrong. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I did
Wise
take a
man.
long, yeah, I did take a long, hard look at the Marine Corps, but so Army. So I was like, you know what, it's going to be Army for me. So I I went and took the SAT because my mother begged me to, and I was never a strong math student at all. I mean, I was
Hmm.
pretty solid with language skills, English, etc., but math not so much. So mom was like, "Go take the SAT," and I went and did it, and it was kind of a finger drill because honestly, I'm not going to college, so I don't really see what the point to this is. So I got a
Right.
pretty low, not god awful low, but not great either. Went and did that. Fast forward a couple months, January, February rolls around. Pretty much everybody else is locked into their college plan. And my mother and father sit me down at the dinner table one night after I think I was running indoor track, so I just
Hmm.
probably run 12 miles. And I'm sitting down at the dinner table. It's 8 o'clock. And they say, look, particularly my mother, she's taken the lead on this one, says, hey, we think that the military is a good fit for you. But all that being said, just do us a favor, consider it a favor, and go to college for 1 year. We can afford to send you for 1 year. We cannot pay for 4 years of college for you. Um, Parenthetically, here in North Carolina, the state university system is pretty inexpensive, relatively speaking, of
Right.
course. I mean, a lot of people, it's cheaper for people in New Jersey to send their kids out of state to North Carolina schools than it is for them to pay in state in New Jersey. I know this because
No
half my
kidding.
classmates ended up being from the Northeast. So
Wow.
yeah, I assume that's still the case. This is 25 years ago now, but
Right.
so they say, mom says, go to college, just give it 1 year, do your best, don't just completely goof off and fail out. And I said, okay, fine. So I applied to East Carolina, which at the time was known for a party school. I'm pretty sure it still maintains some of that reputation anyway.
Yeah.
But not particularly hard to get into. So
Hmm.
there's that. So I said, okay, mom, for you, I will go do 1 year of school, and then after that, I'm probably going to go enlist and go do things. But I will do it for you. Fine. So I apply, get in, show up to orientation in August, show up to the main event in August, and I sign up for military science as a elective, which for the
Okay.
untested is ROTC, Reserve Officer Training
Hmm.
Corps. I sign up for that and start showing up in the mornings to early. I can't remember, maybe 5:30, 6 a.m., something like that, PT sessions,
Right.
and I'm one of the only freshmen that's out there doing it, or at least I should say, I'm one of the only freshman who's not under a contract.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So the captain pulls me aside and says, "Hey, Cadet Vogel, why are you out here? All the people that are out here, at least as far as the underclassmen, the only ones that are out here are the ones that are under an RTC contract and have to be here. Why are you here?" And it seemed like an odd question to me, because why would I sign up to do army stuff and then not show up to do army stuff? I mean, I
Yeah.
basically answered him just like that. Like, why would I even be here? And he just kind of looked at me with this cockeyed expression, like, yeah, you know what? You bring up a good point. Do you want a scholarship? I just remember standing there dumbfounded. I must have just turned 19 at this point. I think I was a baby 19-year-old, and I'm just looking at him like, sure, yes, yes. So this is the fall of 2000. So again, to kind of put you in the timeline, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, great. And he goes, okay, we'll start processing it today. And so kind of finish out the fall semester. I start putting in all the stuff for my security clearance because kind of, they run all that stuff while you're still a cadet, by the way.
Right.
Um, very invasive. But I'll tell you, for anybody who's ever gone through an adoption, I
Mm.
can honestly tell you, we're going to take a brief divergence here.
No, that's all good.
My wife and I did an international adoption, and the process to get vetted for an adoption is far more intrusive than my security clearance ever was.
Yeah. I can
True
see that
story.
for sure.
True
Yeah.
story. Okay, so anyway, so come back after the Christmas break in January, and it's time for me to sign my contract officially. So March of 2001, I sign on a dotted line to the United States Army saying, yes, I will commission in 2004. And then upon then, I'm, obligated to do at least 4 years of active service. And then there's always that fine print, right? The other 4 years of the
Right.
inactive ready reserve, the IRR. Great. So finish out my freshman year. I go out to Texas, where I usually spent most of my summers with my aunt and uncle.
Hmm.
Go goof off, be a lifeguard, come back in the August of 2001, start my MS2 sophomore year. And then I think we all remember that balmy, warm September morning in 2001 where everything changed.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah. So I just remember, I was a second year, cadet, and I was watching the stuff going down on the screen. And, obviously I wasn't read on to anything, but I said, I don't know what this is, but whatever it is, it involves me somehow.
Yeah.
And so, also just kind of interesting. One of my professors, um, college professors, not a military guy, he was a civilian.
Hmm.
Um, the day after 9/11, not all the classes were canceled for whatever reason. It was kind of a mixed bag. I had a few that were and a few that weren't. And so one of mine that wasn't canceled, I went ahead and went in that morning. And this professor had been maybe a TA, teacher assistant at
Okay.
University of Texas, Austin. If you recall back in the day, what is it, the shooter that went up in the tower?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He
Hmm.
had been on the campus when that happened
Oh,
and had
wow.
lived through it. Like, I mean, when I say lived through it, I mean like he was there when it was all happening. Like he saw
Right.
people die. And so we're fast forward to, 9/12. We're sitting in this guy's classroom, and he's real formal, very, very dignified, older gentleman. Just kind of gets up, sits, cross-legged on his desk, and is like, let's just talk. We're not going to have class today. We're just going to talk.
Right.
And it was oddly kind of an interesting experience to have somebody who'd gone through some kind of crazy trauma like that before, to actually kind of help lead students who are all just completely gobsmacked as to
Mm.
what has just happened. Um, and I'm pretty sure I was in my BDUs for that too. I was just sitting there in my
Oh, wow.
BDUs like, oh man, what does this mean? So finish up sophomore year, go to airborne school in between my sophomore and junior year,
Okay.
and down in Fort Benning, Georgia, now renamed Fort Moore, Georgia.
That's interesting that you were able to do airborne uh, while you're still going to college,
So
because
cadets are
because
yeah,
you haven't commissioned at that point, right?
correct. So cadets, and I'll speak for the Army. I don't know how the other services are, but in the Army, it all comes down to money, right? The Army runs on grade.
Mm. Yeah.
So if you're a West Point cadet, the United States Military Academy, or you're a cadet command, which is the command that's responsible for ROTC. If
Hmm.
you're one of those two, they have spots, we call them slots, that are allocated to go to these schools, always during the summer, because that's when the breaking school is, right?
Hmm.
But it all comes down to resources. And so,
Right.
you know, second brigade, you're going to have this many slots. First brigade, you'll have this many. And so cadets compete for
Mm.
these slots, and that's under the assumption that people even want to go. I mean, usually they do. I mean, usually there's
Yeah.
I'm totally making up these numbers, but it's, hey, first brigade, you're going to get 10 airborne slots this summer, and you'll have 50 people who want them, and so you got to compete for them.
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't say that I was like the most stellar cadet in the world, but you know, fell out of the sky and landed in my lap. I said I wanted to go, and they sent me. So Went and
Very
did that
nice.
as a cadet. Did my 5 jump, became a 5 jump chump. That's what we like to call them. You go get your wings, and then you run back to your duty station and not to a non-airborne unit, right? So
Yeah,
so
yeah.
came
What did you call it again? Five
five
jump.
jump chump.
I
Yeah,
love it. That's
and
good.
we had a Marine. We call them black hats if you were a cadre for the air assault school or jump master school or airborne school. So you'll wear a black ball cap, which makes you
Mm-hmm.
stand out from the crowd, and it just makes the instructors and the cadre easy to identify. And
Right.
we had a Marine Corps black hat when I was at airborne school, and that was
No kidding.
the first no kidding like ass chewing I ever got. And my experience in the military was from a Marine Corps black hat at airborne school, and I was being I mean, I didn't do anything dangerous or anything. It was just I was being a knucklehead and not paying attention in the chow hall of all places.
Yeah.
It was the one item per hand rule, and
Oh
I tried
yeah.
to pull a fast one, and I totally got caught dead to rights. And this guy tore my head off, man. What's your roster number? Charlie 234. Charlie, oh, you're a cadet. This is gonna be fun. Yeah. So
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that the Marine Corps had a little something to do with your training. That's good.
it made an impression. So
Yeah.
uh, so did airborne school without incident. My father was able to come down from they retired here in the Fayetteville Fort Bragg area, so they drove down to Fort Benning, which is, I don't know, like an 8 or 9 hour drive. It's doable. It's long, but it's doable. And my dad, who was an old jump master, was able to come pin my wings on my chest, which was a pretty
Nice.
awesome, yeah, pretty awesome experience for him. And of course, he did the whole blood wings thing. So
Yeah.
for those who don't know, you don't put the little dammits on the back of the pins, and you get to wear them in your chest, not on your chest, in your chest. So
That's right. They bang it in. Yeah.
oh man,
Like,
I've seen some wild stuff. I mean, my old man put some pressure on it. We had some fun with it. I've seen some wild and crazy stuff that would qualify as hazing. Let's just say I've
yeah.
seen cartoon sized mallets.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. Wow.
Yeah, some of it was exaggerated, of course, but
Yeah, yeah.
so go
That's
back.
wild.
Yeah, so go back to school that fall. So now I'm a junior. This is my third year, and
Hmm.
uh, the summer between your third and your fourth year. So think junior, senior years when if you're an ROTC cadet, you go off to what we just call for short camp and go do your. It's basically a several week rather long field training exercise where you're being
Mm.
evaluated, and it's very germane to the ranking system of which how they figure out how to branch you and do all those things. So anyway, I do my junior
I
year.
see.
So I do my junior year without incident. Do what I got to do, and then the following summer I go off to Fort Lewis is what it was called. Now it's
Mm.
Joint Base Lewis McChord up in the Washington
Yeah.
Tacoma area. Did my summer camp up there and finished in the top third. Good enough. I wasn't like the number one cadet, but I faster than the bear. That's really all you need to do at these kinds of schools, right? So went and did that and returned to my ROTC detachment. Actually, before I get to that, I did get to do while I was out at Fort Lewis. Upon completion of my advanced camp, my camp, I was able to linger behind there at Fort Lewis for an additional, I want to say month. I don't know, maybe
Wow.
maybe 5 weeks to do what we call CTLT, which is the Cadet Training Leadership something something. Basically, the point of the program is as a rising senior cadet, you're supposed to mirror a second lieutenant for part of a summer and to see this
Oh,
is
I
what it's
see.
like to be a lieutenant, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So because I was already airborne qualified, I was able to go to First Special Forces Group where I did not follow a second lieutenant around. I followed a bunch of salty Green Beret NCOs and a captain, team leader, and spent the summer
Yeah.
with them, which was that was a really interesting experience to say the least.
So you got to go do the training with them, all that type of stuff.
So they during the point of the summer that I just showed up at, and there's two of us cadets. There's a pair of us, so we were a buddy team. We they were doing a train up to do all their their urban
Mm.
warfare.
Right.
They're doing certifications for that. So they handed us, some earplugs and some iPro and a Kevlar helmet and was like, hey, we're gonna do some breaching on these, plywood doors. So we want you to be the, the hostage that we're rescuing. So go lay behind these cinder blocks, and when you feel the loud boom, just stand up. Like some stuff that I don't really know would be entirely, shall we call, safe.
Yeah.
But I was a dumb lieutenant, or I wasn't even a lieutenant. I was a dumb cadet at this point, going, "Oh, whatever you say, boss." So had a blast with the Green Berets that summer, just learning about special operations and all that.
That was a good play on words. So you had a blast.
I
That was
did
nice.
indeed.
Yeah.
Another thing of note. So this was the summer of 2003. So what happened a few
Okay.
months prior to the summer of 2003?
So, I don't know. Help me out. Was this Iraq when we went to
This is
Iraq?
Iraq.
Okay, I got you. Sorry,
So yeah, no,
my
I put
mind
you
went
on the
completely blank. Yeah. Okay,
I
so
put you on
Iraq
the
was
spot.
happening then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm a cadet. I sign up to be hey, I want to be in the army. And then 9/11 happens, and then we go into
Right.
Afghanistan, and then fast forward about 15 months. That's my beer math on that. And then we invade Iraq, and so I'm a rising senior, and since the time I've signed my contract, we've started not one but two wars, or I'm sorry, overseas contingency operations, because of course,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I start my senior year, and I wanted to be in the infantry. That's all I ever wanted. So they say, where do you want to go and what do you want to do? And I had infantry, artillery, armor. I wanted to do combat arms, is what we called it back then. And then I wanted to
Hmm.
be at Fort Bragg, the home of the airborne, right? So I had
Right.
Fort Bragg. Well, when it came down to everybody to receive their branches, I got my second pick. So I didn't get to be infantry. I got field artillery instead. So
Okay.
I was pretty bummed about that, but I was like, maybe I can find my way to parlay this into something else. So, but I did get the other thing I wanted, which was Fort Bragg, because they
Okay.
thought I was nuts for volunteering to go to Fort Bragg. I didn't realize at the time. I was like, man, I'm gonna have to outcompete all these people to get these Fort Bragg slots. No one else wanted them. Jokes on me, right?
Hey, but you got what you wanted, so it's all
Yeah,
good.
well, I did, and so artillery, right? It's combat arms. It's not quite what I wanted, but we're gonna shine this turd and make it nice.
Yeah.
Um, I did find it odd though, considering I was somebody who had struggled so mightily with math. The
There's
good,
a little bit of math involved
yeah,
when you're talking about
there's
artillery.
a lot of math involved. It's the bad news. The good news is it's amazing how much data we have to fill up these firing tables. So you're actually not doing a whole lot of actual, no kidding math. What you learn in the field artillery school is what things you need to account for, and then where in the firing table you need to look to get the number. So it's really more
I
translating
see.
firing. It's really trying to figure out variables, and then you've got 300 pages of numbers, you got to land on the right one. So
Right.
it's no joke, but you're not actually doing a whole lot of computation. There's some.
Hmm.
So I was able to figure all that out eventually. So I reported into Fort Sill, Oklahoma, in August of 2004. After
Hmm.
I commissioned in August, because I got a little bit behind on my school, because I took some classes I didn't need to, because I didn't have a very good advisor, and I kind of got
Ah,
taken
yeah.
for a ride a little bit. So I had to take one summer school session in order to close out on
Yeah, that
time.
makes
So
sense.
I
Yeah.
was an August commissionee, not a May June like most of the rest of my peers. So
Right.
that's kind of on me for not. Let's just say I was very naive and trusting some advisor who had absolutely no personal stake whatsoever in whether I succeeded or not. So lesson learned there, right?
What a good advisor. Yeah.
Yeah, or a
Yeah.
bad advisor.
Yeah.
So I commissioned in early August, and then on my way out to Fort Sill from North Carolina. Now, since I was at East Carolina, right? So um, I swing through Raleigh, because my sister is like a day away from giving birth to my firstborn nephew, and my brother-in-law, who's a very very dear friend of mine from high school time, he's in training to be an F-16 pilot, and is at flight school, and absolutely under no circumstances can peel away at all.
Wow.
So I'm actually there for the birth of my nephew
Wow.
with my
Well,
sister,
that's really cool.
and this is the old days, right? So I'm holding up a not smartphone just so Joe can actually hear what's going on there in the birthing unit. So he could be present in that way. And so I got to be there and cut the cord for my firstborn nephew,
Wow.
who is a second year student at the Citadel right now. So
Holy cow.
yeah, we keep it in the family here.
Yeah.
So hop in my car and drive west, and I show up to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the home of the Field Artillery School. And man, that was a eye opening experience. So lot of I already kind of touched on some of this. A lot of math, a lot
Hmm.
of computation, a lot of all that kind of stuff. In the artillery world, at least on the officer side, because if you're enlisted, it's much more narrowly focused.
Hmm.
On the officer side, they're really just trying to make you as as wide as possible on your knowledge, but it's maybe an inch deep. Just enough to be
All right.
just enough to be dangerous, right?
Yeah.
So they divide artillery really into two tracks, and you have to kind of know both of them. One of them is gunnery, and that's what I was talking about,
Hmm.
knowing all the computational procedures to shoot safely.
Right.
And then the other side is just what we call fire support, which is you're on the other side of the artillery, meaning you're calling it in and you're watching it, and you're adjusting it, and you're making sure the rounds are landing where they're supposed to and doing all the adjustments. So just for brevity, we call those fire support teams or the
Hmm.
FIST. I'm pretty sure
Oh, okay.
The Marine Corps calls them the same thing. I'm pretty sure. So
Yeah, I think so. Well, they go to the same school, if
they
I'm not
do. So
mistaken.
yeah,
Yeah.
we had several Marine Corps instructors because my actual class that I was in was
Hmm.
all Army because it was a provisional class. Because after Iraq started, they started just creating.
Oh, yeah.
they had all their pre-planned classes for the fiscal year, and then they're like, "Oh crap, we need to add in two or three more of these." Mine was
Right.
one of those, and so we didn't have any Marines or allied officers in ours because it was ad hoc. So,
Wow.
but we did have Marine instructors, and one of the funniest things I ever heard came from one of our Marine instructors. Y'all are good at the humor thing. I like that. So he was a captain, and we were all a bunch of baby second lieutenants,
Yeah.
and he's giving us the proverbial Friday afternoon safety brief, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Where
yeah.
where so much of the world's wisdom is contained and condensed into these fine speeches, often at the same level of Pericles, right? So this Marine captain looks at all these second lieutenants and says, "Men, it's Friday. Make good choices this weekend, and remember." When you go into town in Fort Sill, it's this really small town in Oklahoma called Lawton, and it's a small
Hmm.
military town. All the stereotypes hold true. He says, when you go into Lawton this evening and you start drinking at the bar and you meet one of the Lawton queens, just remember that you have Tricare written on your forehead.
That's pretty good.
Which was a line I totally appropriated and stole and used in most of my safety briefs for the rest of my career. So I owe that to a Marine captain in 2004.
Very nice.
So I do the artillery school is I want to say it was about 6 months. So
Oh,
I do
wow.
it all the while I'm doing it. I am doing the super extra pre ranger PT program because I wanted to compete for one of the small handful of ranger school slots.
Right.
That if you're in the infantry school, you don't have to ask for an infantry slot. They basically send you whether you want to go or not. And all the other branches, it's not quite the same. Like
Yeah.
there's limitations and limits, and you have to compete and whatever. So 6 months of getting up, 5 o'clock or probably earlier than that, 4:30 in the morning to go do all the extra wild and crazy PT. And I get
Right.
to the end of artillery school, and I was awarded one of the I want to say two slots for Ranger School, but then I went and got my physical during that, I don't know, 5 or 6 day period in between
Hmm.
one graduation and then the next Rangers class starts, all the way
Right.
on the East Coast, right? So I go and get my physical, and I fail my physical because I had some kind of weird rash outbreak on my arms from being in the field. It's not really important, but the bottom line is I did 6 months of wild and crazy extra PT and ended up failing the physical. And I say, "Hey, what do I need? What do I do next? What's my recourse?" And they said, "Your recourse is you go report to your first duty station. Have a nice day." So I
So
report
you
into the
kind of missed
82nd.
your missed your chance on it then.
Yeah. So I'd say 6 months down the drain. I mean, the PT was great, but whatever. Really,
Well,
who knows?
maybe not down the drain. It was still worthwhile,
Well, it was. I just,
Yeah.
in retrospect, I was like, man, wish I could have got that extra hour of sleep every single day for 6 months. But,
That's true. Yeah, sleep's important.
yeah. So, I also remember here this was funny to me. So while I'm going through this really really intense academic portion of artillery school, and I'm getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep because I'm getting up so early and I'm staying up all night studying and doing all the study groups and all this stuff. Back in the past, when I was a cadet at East Carolina, I had several peers who were going through nursing school. East Carolina has a really fantastic nursing school, and so they were doing nursing school simultaneously with ROTC, and they would never come out and party with us because they were always studying and doing
Yeah.
all the really difficult, very difficult stuff in college, while the rest of us knuckleheads were out drinking beers and chasing girls and doing all the wrong things.
Right.
Fast
Yeah.
forward to
That's a
artillery
tough
school.
program. That's a
Yeah,
tough
well,
program.
fast forward to artillery school. A couple of these friends, and one of them was a male nurse, he's at Officer Basic at Fort Sam Houston, if that rings a bell to anybody. That's
Yeah.
in San Antonio, where all
Mm-hmm.
the girls are, right? And he's at nursing OBC, which is basically a joke because it's almost like you guys spent 4 years getting smoked in college trying to get your nursing degrees and you made it. So all we're gonna do is just give you the basics and y'all can go party, have a good time. And
Oh
so now
wow.
he's the one calling me at 11:30 at night, going woo, and I'm just laying there grudgingly, going, I totally deserve this. Totally deserve this.
Yeah, payback's a bitch. That's what I've
Yeah,
heard.
it sure is. So I immediately hop in my car and proceed to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the home of the Special Operations and Airborne Center of the Universe, and report into the Division Artillery Headquarters, also known as DIVARTY. And I'm still kind of grumbling to myself. This is, I don't know, January. I think it's early February at this point of 05. So it's winter, not brutal winters here in North Carolina, but definitely cold. And I report in to the DIVARTY headquarters office, and I'm told to go see the XO, who's a lieutenant colonel. And I'm still a little bit butthurt about working so hard to go to Ranger School, and then I didn't get to go. So
Yeah.
I got that in my back pocket and a chip on my shoulder. And I walk in and get my first real introduction to the 82nd Airborne Division, and I walk into this 05's office and do all the report in procedures, all that stuff. And he does what we call the lean. He does the left shoulder lean, and he looks over on my left shoulder and doesn't see the Ranger tab, and proceeded to call me some words that I'm not going to share on this podcast because civilized people don't need to hear it.
Sorry, I went out for a second, but
Yeah.
I think you're still good. You
Yeah.
can keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. So he proceeds to call me all the names in the book and tell me I'm a worthless human because I'm not Ranger qualified. And then says, hey, so this is, I don't know, like early February. He says, hey, don't worry about Ranger School. You're going to get your chance. But in the meantime, I'm sending you to 1st Brigade. Have you unpacked all your bags and stuff yet from Fort Sill? And I said, well, not really. I was single at the time. So I was like, I'm kind of living out of my car. He's like, great, because you're deploying. And so I go down the street and report into my battalion, artillery battalion headquarters, and find out like, oh yeah, we're deploying in 60 days. So,
oh my God.
Yeah. So he was right. Why unpack?
That's a true statement. 60 days, man.
So I barely have time to get integrated into the unit. I don't really have a whole lot of belongings, which is a good thing. I had just missed what we called RFI, which was the Rapid Fielding Initiative, which means the unit is deploying, so it's the personal equipment like TA-50
okay.
type stuff. So they show up with a huge couple 18-wheelers, and guys walk up to the trucks and they get handed their instead of having the old Kevlars, they get handed to the new ACH helmets, and then they get handed a flak vest instead of wearing the or an IVA instead of a flak vest, and like the newer cooler stuff. I missed all that by a week or so. So I'm just wearing the basic issue TA-50 that the installation issues you when you show up, right? And we get issued all our DCUs. I know you remember the DCUs.
Oh yeah.
Not the cookie doughs. It was the ones after that, but
yeah.
So get my DCUs.
Was it the big giant collars?
So it was a mixed bag.
Oh, was it?
The
Okay.
ones that the guys that were there ahead of me, so
Yeah.
who were on who'd been there long enough to do a deployment already, they all had the Elvis collars.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did not get any of the Elvis collars because I was a cherry, of course. So I didn't have a combat patch. I was a second lieutenant, and I didn't have an Elvis collar. So it was basically just screaming newbie, right? So I was an artilleryman, and all of the company. Usually, when you're an artillery lieutenant, think back to what I said about Fort Sill. You either
Yeah.
go down to an artillery battery, and you were a fire direction officer working in the fire direction center, doing all the computations for firing.
Hmm.
Maybe you'll be a platoon leader for the actual gun line, but usually they don't send the brand new folks there. That's usually for the first lieutenants.
Right.
Or you go down the street to the infantry company, and you're a fire support officer for the infantry.
Ah, okay.
So again, so the fire support officer is ultimately responsible for all of the indirect fire that company either has at its disposal or needs to coordinate for. So that's
Okay.
aircraft, that's everything beyond their own 60 millimeter mortars. So if there's excuse me, if there's 81s or 120s or aircraft, I mean, heaven forbid naval gunfire, not a thing we were using in Afghanistan, but that would also apply. You're
Wow.
responsible for all of that stuff.
I
Well,
didn't
all of
realize that.
those, yeah, go ahead.
I didn't realize that the artillery officers were doing that.
Yeah, so I
I
mean, you coordinate for it.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it at the end of the day, it's not your guns, right? You don't own that battery that's firing. You don't own those Navy ships that are firing. You don't own those
Right.
Apaches that are shooting. But it's your responsibility to make sure that everybody's got the right comms channels, that you've done the coordinations, that the commander is going to be the one who's responsible for clearing the ground to make sure there's not fratricide and all these things. But really, at
Right.
the end of the day, that's the commander's job. But as the fire support officer, I mean, they're going to be looking at you to make sure that all that stuff is straight.
Yeah.
Well, all of those jobs for the companies were filled because they were getting ready to deploy, and all that had been mapped out months before I showed up.
Hmm.
So they put me in the brigade headquarters for the first, I don't know, 2 months of the deployment, waiting. So we go to Afghanistan, we fly through Kyrgyzstan, and
Hmm.
land there in, I want to say, March or April of 2005, and they put me in the brigade headquarters in the brigade fire support element, which is basically just like staff stuff. So they put
Yeah.
me up there for the first 2 months, just waiting for a company spot to open up, which did. But I did get some pretty cool experience. I wasn't leading soldiers per se, although I did have a few junior soldiers and a couple NCOs who were part of the brigade FO
Hmm.
team. We called them the Colts, the lasing teams. I got to lead these guys. I mean, honestly, they didn't really need me. It was I was almost learning more from the NCOs than they were getting leadership from me. But you know how that goes, right? But
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the great thing about, in my opinion, the military is
yeah,
the young officers, can latch on to the NCOs, and they can really help each other out.
yeah,
I think it's really good.
yeah. I totally agree with that. And I only know my own kind of experience. In the 82nd in paratrooper land, NCOs have even more uh, WASTA than probably elsewhere in the Army. I believe that to be true because,
Mhm.
paratroopers are generally have to be mutually supporting, but also have to be autonomous because oftentimes we have to operate in smaller teams just because that's kind of the nature of the way things work out on a drop zone.
Right.
And so we empower our NCOs, I think, more than most of your kind of conventional infantry.
Hmm.
I'm sure there's people screaming at me saying that's not the case. That was my experience. So we had really, really, really fantastic NCOs pretty much everywhere I looked.
Right.
And so I learned a lot from mostly guys, but some pretty good female NCOs as well. So I went up and did that for about 2 months. That we'd go out, we'd do air assault missions out to the Pakistani border. This was in a RC East, so Kaus province. If anybody
Hmm.
knows Salerno, I'm sure some folks will know where that is. So kind of the summer of 2005, and they'd air assault me and a couple NCOs and soldiers out to one of the border checkpoints and say, hey, we need to register these guns at Salerno. And what a registration is for artillery is just you go out there and fire them in order to make sure that they are going to be accurate for when you need them. So it's kind of like practice
I
shots,
see.
just like spotting
Yeah.
practice shots and you know
Okay.
reporting back so they can kind of dial them in is what you're doing.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And they put us right on the Pakistani border, and we'd go out there usually with a handful of Green Berets, not usually a whole ODA, not a whole team, and then we'd be up there with some Afghan commandos and some other people. There's some 3-letter agency people that were usually poking around, but I didn't really talk to them much. And I'll never forget one of the first times they sent me out there to do one of those registration missions. My boss looked at me and said, "Hey, things are starting to heat up on the other side of the border, and they've loosened up some of the rules of engagement. And so while you're up there, if you see anything come through that valley, like it needs to die." And I remember
Oh,
being,
wow.
you know, I'm a 23-year-old lieutenant going, "Oh, this just got real." You know, because I'd been in country for a couple months and I'd been, you know, doing stuff in the operations center and driving around, and you know we were on the road, so we were exposed to some IEDs and stuff. But like this was the first time it was like, no, that we're actually on offensive operations now,
Right. Yeah.
instead of just, you know, trying to be safe. And I'll never forget that moment. That was kind of the first eye-opening experience I had towards all that. And things would definitely get pretty heated there in that border region. That was some of the first times I worked with Air Force JTACs when
Oh,
they
wow.
controlling A-10s coming in and doing strafing runs and all that stuff. So
That
yeah,
is incredible.
yeah. I mean, an amazing experience to be sure, but definitely not in Kansas anymore. Yeah. So, but we had everything. So A-10s we'd have A-10s on station. We'd get
Holy cow.
H-64s a whole lot. The Apaches, the gunships.
hmm
Not a whole lot of Kiowas in theater at that time. Most of that stuff had been pulled over to Iraq.
Oh, I
So,
see.
um, so did that for a couple months, and then about July August timeframe rolls around, and a spot down at one of the infantry companies opens up, and so I get sped to the rear, and they, you know, pack up my stuff and say, "You're going down to Charlie Company." So this is Charlie, second time 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. So for all the history
hmm
nerds, that's the Devils in Baggy Pants. So 1st Brigade, 82nd Airborne Division, made famous,
Okay.
particularly during the Italian campaign in World War II.
hmm
That's where the Devils in Baggy Pants comes from. And
Right.
so I go down to that company, and I get shipped out to this fire base that is out in the middle of nowhere called Gardez. And you know, I meet my successor, and we have a couple days of a handoff, and then he's like, "All right, I'm out," and he takes off. And then it's you know, I meet my boss, who's a young infantry captain, prior service guy, we're pretty squared away, and then our first sergeant, who I just thought was a demigod. Awesome dude. So again, now it's another reality check. So now we're out in the middle of nowhere. So I went
Yeah.
from being out on the border where it was pretty hot to being kind of up in the middle of nowhere where it's much more quiet, or at least so I thought, right?
Yeah.
But I actually am responsible for some fire support team, the FIST, the fire support team. So I've got
hmm
a couple of junior NCOs, a staff sergeant, and then a few, you know, PFCs or private.
Right.
Um, but we're very decentralized because we're responsible for a very, very large area. This is in the Paktia province in Gardez. So we have, you know, a
hmm
platoon 20 miles away, another platoon 10 miles away, one there, and then in the fourth one is, you know, 5 miles away. And so I had to learn real quick a couple things, and one of them was my job was to make sure that all of those platoons who were far away and going out on their own patrols all the time, you know, usually every other day.
hmm
You know, the company FSO doesn't get a day off. He doesn't get a refit and reorganize day, because if first platoon's going out, he's making sure their fire support is covered,
hmm
while second and third platoon are doing their refit and reorganize. But meanwhile, the AT anti-tank platoon is also going out, and they're almost in a completely other province. And so you have to be aware of what's going on at all times, and you have to be able
Yeah.
to plan accordingly. And these platoons are always doing like a leapfrog, right? So you don't get a day off. And so that kind of wore me down after a while. I did have some pretty great NCOs who were helping out and doing all the right things.
So you were in charge of the guns, the crew that was in charge of the guns, right?
Well, sort of. So where we were so
Uh-huh.
isolated that we didn't have artillery or big mortars out where we were at. We had our own organic 60 millimeter mortars, which we used a lot. But everything that we had that came to our help out there was all air,
Oh, I see.
because
Okay.
all the big guns were elsewhere. Which kind of leads me to another thing I'll talk about in a minute here. But so, all over the place, very decentralized. And so I'm trying to figure out how to plan all these things while simultaneously, here we had these Navy aircraft. I don't know if they fly them anymore. They were the EA-6Bs. We called them Prowlers. Now I think
Oh, yeah, yeah.
they fly the Growlers now, but this was the
Hmm.
predecessor to that, the Prowlers. And this was kind of at the very beginning of the EW electronic warfare um,
Okay.
age, that kind of what the way we know it anyway. I know they were doing some of this stuff in Desert Storm too, but and so when the remote controlled IEDs started becoming very prevalent, we figured out that if we would fly these EA-6B Prowler aircraft over the areas that we were going to be patrolling through, like right before we would go through. So I'm talking minutes,
Hmm.
maybe an hour tops. What these aircraft would do is they blast out the whole electromagnetic spectrum over and over and over again. And so if somebody's putting in a remote control IED, it would, in theory at least,
Uh,
it would self detonate, because
yeah.
the remote control, you beat them to the punch. The remote control, you beat them. So my job was to make sure that we called them burns, these electronic warfare burns over our routes every single day. And just parenthetically, we figured out that every now and then we'd have dirtbags who'd be putting in these roadside IEDs, and they'd be out
Hmm.
there kind of testing and making sure everything's good right around the time one of our birds would fly
Oh,
over, and they'd boom. And
wow.
so all the infantry guys who were always talking trash to the few artillery guys, we would get credit for that one. So
Nice.
we had a tick marks on the whiteboard there in the talk saying like, "Oh, the FSO gets credit for that one." So
Nice.
yeah, good times. So we were responsible for that, and then the base defense. I mean, at the end of the day,
Oh,
we
yeah.
didn't have the big, like I said, the big assets, but we did have our own small mortars.
Hmm.
It was my job to make sure that if we ever needed to use those in a broken arrow kind of situation,
Right.
that they were ready to go. So did that for a few months, and then, if a lot of your listeners may recall, if the Operation Red Wings sounds familiar.
Hmm.
So we were not involved in Red Wings. However, it happened in the battle space for my brigade headquarters, which was, the Task Force Devil,
Okay.
which was the brigade
Hmm.
headquarters. So that all happened up in the northern areas of that area of operations. And so while the Special Operations Task Force was
Hmm.
scrambling and getting people marshaled together to go do the rescue mission and go find Marcus and the rest of the guys,
Hmm.
our battalion was grabbed up and said, "Hey, you guys need to go do the outermost security of these areas, because we know that there's dirt bags on the inside of this massive perimeter." I mean, when I say massive, I
Hmm.
mean absolutely like a whole province.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They were saying, we know that there's bad guys inside. What we need you to do is make sure that no more come inside. And so we
Right.
got posted up kind of in the periphery, and we're pulling, security ultimately for kind of the outer areas of Red Wings, and also Red Wings 2, which was kind of the follow on to that. So
Hmm.
that kind of made for an interesting mid to late summer adventure for one lieutenant and his band of merry paratroopers. So
Hmm. Wow.
yeah.
That so you now how did like because you're talking about was it Marcus Luttrell?
Yeah.
All the stuff that went down with him. When did you guys kind of hear about that stuff? Was it immediate? Because
Yeah, no,
you're
that's a great question. So, I mean, the brass tacks truth is we had absolutely no idea what was going on the inside at the time. I
Yeah.
mean, frankly, we didn't even really have much of a clue until, a year or two later.
No kidding. Wow.
What we knew was there was a downbird and that it was a catastrophe. That's what we knew.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Wow. That's
yeah,
pretty wild that you were there during that time.
yeah. So, um, fall kind of continues on normal patrols. A lot of contact, a lot of weird stuff, and then the winter sets in, which starts pretty
Mhm.
early there, and then Gardez is everything's up high in Afghanistan, right? But it's in between these two mountain passes that when the winter comes, or at least the late fall, become unpassable. The passes are
Right.
unpassable, and so everything has to be flown out to you at that point. So the bad news is the weather's awful and the mountain passes are bad and you can't pretty much go anywhere. That's the bad news. The good news is all the dirt bags pretty much take the winter off because it's so bad that it gets it could they want to go hide in their fart sack and stay warm too, right? So
Yeah.
the winter is pretty mild as far as enemy contact is concerned. I mean, you don't ever want to completely let your guard down, but
Right.
there's some IED nonsense going on, but most of the assaults
Hmm.
take a few month pause. So I remember, I want to say this. It was probably December. It could have been January. I
Hmm.
remember our battalion commander had to fly out to us because that was the only way he could get to us. So he comes out in one of the big Chinooks on the ring routes,
Hmm.
and he pulls all of the leadership in the company, and so probably E6 and above, all the officers
Hmm.
E6 and above, and sits us down and says, "Hey, so I'm out here to tell you guys a couple things. First thing is, um, consider this a warning order. We've just received word that next year. So this was in early 2006. So next year in 2007, we are on the chart to go to Iraq. So
Oh, wow.
so probably about 12 to 15 months from now, we're not going to talk specifics yet, but just consider this your warning order. Like we're going to Iraq. So whatever that means to you, just start mentally and emotionally preparing yourself for that."
I mean, you're on and that's a 1 year deployment for you,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, so we're most of the way through a 1 year deployment, probably about
Hmm.
9 months through a 1 year deployment, and we're and it's been a rough one. It's been a rough one.
Hmm.
Let's be honest here, and we're already being told like, hey, you're going to Iraq, and then it's immediately after that he says, and speaking of Iraq, uh, there is now an insurgency. It's in full swing. It is going very badly for us, and the SecDef is going to start pulling a lot of our assets out of theater to go support the effort in Iraq because Afghanistan is now the economy of force mission. Like we're pretty much on our own up here, boys. So
Holy cow.
yeah, so it was a pretty deflating. I'll never forget that conversation. Right, it's you're going, and oh by the way, everything's in the meantime, in the short term, like we're most of your assets are getting pulled out of theater, and so we started getting less air cover
Yeah.
and less mortars when we requested them and all those things. So yeah, that was a very real moment as
So
well. So
so you're 9 months in, you get told that hey, you're going to deploy again. It's in the within the year, or within a year, I should say.
yeah,
And you haven't made it home yet. You still got a couple months to go.
yeah,
Uh, so how was the last part of that deployment for you?
yeah. Well, and about a month later is when the fighting season started to kick back up. So
Yeah.
we had we ended up leaving in mid March. So we had about a month or so of the fighting season before I mean it was our time was up and we had to tap out. So
Yeah.
yeah, things start picking back up again. But again, it's at the end of a deployment where you're pretty much familiar with the terrain. You know all the
Hmm.
people. You know everything. So you're ready for it. So we were replaced by a. So we were an infantry company. We were replaced by an infantry or correction, a engineer battalion for whatever reason
Hmm.
from 10th Mountain
Okay.
Division. So again, our light infantry, light division counterparts came in, and I'll just say that the battalion commander during his we call it a PDSS, which is your pre-deployment site survey, which is like a leader's recon, right? He flew
Right.
out he flew out early ahead of his unit to come look at the ground and get a feel for things. And I'll never forget this too, when, you know, my company commander and first sergeant are walking with this battalion commander. He's, you know, senior to all of us, and you know, I'm the company,
Right.
so just kind of walking in the rear taking notes or whatever. And this engineer lieutenant colonel is just asking all of the wrong questions. So my company commander's like, "Hey, sir, we've got all our defensive positions here, here, and here. Our fire and protective lines have been formed here, and you know, we all really great infantry stuff. You know, here's
Right.
our range
Yeah.
fans, our dead spaces here, here, and here. You know, we've found that the points of origin for enemy incoming comes from this general area, so we put our kill teams in here, here, here." And this infantry, this engineer battalion commander is completely uninterested in any of this stuff, and he's just asking us all the wrong questions, like, "Oh, you know, would you think this would be a good spot for us to move the MWR tent? And you know, how many infantry, you know, how many hookups do you think we can get for internet here and here?" And like, I just remember my first sergeant's like looking over his shoulder at me, and I'm just shrugging, like, "Dude, what do you want me to say?"
Holy crap.
And so, just didn't have his head in the game. And again, maybe once they got on the ground there, things turned out better. I don't know, but what I do know is they lost a lot of guys the first, you know, month or so they were there, which is common
Really?
for operation after a relief in place, a RIP. It is
Yeah.
common for the dirt bags to increase pressure because they know they've got new people. So you
Hmm.
have to anticipate that. You have to know you're going to be tested very early.
Right.
You know, the 10th Mountain folks that replaced us had a rough go. You know,
Hmm.
I think the governor of the province we've been working with there in town, you know, was killed. And
Ooh.
you know, it's Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
It's Afghanistan. So
Wow.
one last war story about my way out of some of my old friends that I would be remiss if I didn't tell this story.
Yeah. Go
so
ahead.
so I'm one of the last people from my company to leave. So the relief in place has taken place, like the proverbial high five. And so, in, you know, day by day by day, our people from my company are slowly getting on a ring route aircraft and flying back to
Hmm.
Bagram, where we're all consolidating there to go home together, you know, or more or less together.
Right.
But I was on the last chopper to leave from my company. Like, my company commander had even left before me for very valid reasons. And so what happens is you have your full combat load, so you have all your
Hmm.
magazines, and you're taking all these magazines and you're emptying them into these huge barrels, basically for the people coming behind you to just take those rounds and load their magazines, right? Because I'm taking my mags
Right.
with me, but I can't take these rounds with me. So everybody's dumping all their stuff, dump. But the rule is, because we're all flying to Bagram on a Chinooks, it was a pair of Chinooks.
Hmm.
You have to have one magazine, one full 30 round
Oh
magazine,
yeah.
just
Hmm.
one. That is the if the ish hits the fan, you've got a magazine, but otherwise we're not taking all the stuff with us. So
Right.
two Chinooks show up. One of them is for cargo, so they hook the sling legs to this, Tricon container, and it's all the last of the sensitive items from the company. So it's all the
Right.
ANCDs, which are the things we use to put the comsec in the radios, all the extra
Hmm.
weapons, so a handful of night vision goggles, but everybody's got their own. Really, it's the heat sights and all the really
Mm.
cool gee whiz infantry stuff. Right there, it's in
Right.
this container. And so that's one Chinook is carrying that, and then the other Chinook is personnel. So we load onto these two Chinooks. I just want to say in advance, I had nothing to do with inspecting the sling legs on this particular combat load. I had nothing to do with it. I was not air assault qualified at the time. And we go wheels up. They push the ramps up so we can't see out the back of the aircraft, but we know there's two of us, and then we also know we've got an AH-64 Apache Escort, and they always fly in pairs. So
Yeah.
I'm the FSO. I know that we have two. So we start flying to Bagram. It's, I don't know, maybe a 30, 40-minute flight. I don't remember. But what I do know is I'm sitting on the bird. I'm the only officer on the bird. So it's me, like one or two junior NCOs, and a whole bunch of junior enlisted guys.
Right.
Only officer on the bird. And I'm sitting on there. We can't hear diddly. I've got my earplugs in. They've got the ramp is partially open, like you can see a little bit of daylight out the back, but you can't actually see anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the crew chiefs start pacing up and down the inside of this Chinook, and going up to the front, and then going to the back and talking, and then just going back and forth. And the pace is starting to pick up. And I'm not a genius, but I know that something is not going right.
Yeah.
And at some
Something is
point,
amiss.
correct. And one of them, at some point, one of them starts looking up and down the rows, and I can tell he's looking for who's in charge. And he locks eyes with me and says, he's yelling over the sound of the rotors, like, "Are you in charge?" And it's the whole like, "Oh boy, yes." The question nobody ever wants to hear, right? Are you in charge?
Yeah.
And he starts shouting at me, and I'm only making out about half of what he's saying, but he's doing some pantomiming, and he basically tells me that the sling legs had broke on the container and that it had dropped.
Oh,
And
my
so,
God.
yeah, so we are flying out over Taliban. We're like in Taliban Indian country,
Yeah.
and the this container falls and breaks, and they're looking at me like, "What do we do?" And I'm like, "I'm not flying the aircraft, so whatever." So they wheel around, and I tell them, "Go ahead and put down over there so we can recover some of this equipment." I'm like screaming this at people because I don't have
Yeah.
radio comms to talk to all these. I don't have a headset, right? And so they put the Chinook down, drop that ramp, and I mean we're very close to the crash site. I mean, I'm talking maybe 20 feet, like it's close.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
we had some papers and stuff in there, so of course when the ramp comes down, you see all the rotor washes blowing all these papers all over
Yeah.
the place. And I see this container, and it's just, I mean, it's a twisted metal mess. And I'm looking around and just see all this equipment. So this is, radios,
Oh, man.
so there's ComSec, right? There's radios, things with fills, weapons.
Yeah.
We did not have any ammunition in it, so there was no ordnance, but all our extra weapons, all this stuff all over the place. And I'm like,
Yeah.
geez, man, what are we gonna do? So I run up to the front of the Chinook, where it's to the crew, and I'm like yelling at the pilot, like, 2 minutes, give us 2 minutes. And then I run back out, and I'm yelling at the soldiers, like, "All right, everybody form a perimeter and give me 5 guys, and we're going to be on the ground here for 60 seconds, 1 minute. Pick up as much stuff as you can,
Oh, my God.
because remember, everybody's down to one magazine, right? So like if we
Yeah.
get engaged, like, we are totally screwed. Like we
Right.
don't even really have enough to break contact. Like it's 1 minute. Give me 5 guys, prior, and I'm yet screaming this over the rotors, right? And, you have 60 seconds to pick up the radios are the priority, followed by the sites, and then the
Yeah. Yeah.
thermals
Yeah.
rather. And it was a mess. So 60 seconds, and I'm down there like with the proverbial stopwatch. 60 seconds. All right, everybody round up and go. And so we all load back onto this aircraft and go. And so, like, we all get back in our seats, which are all kind of inwardly facing, and we're looking in the
Mhm.
cargo hull of this, and it just looks like a junkyard. It's just nuts. And I mean, obviously we had to leave a whole bunch of stuff too.
Yeah.
The funny thing about Afghanistan, I mean, we landed this bird. We're on the ground for not even 2 minutes, and when we landed, there was not a human being in sight. By the time we were going wheels up, there's like kids and women standing around looking at us, like, "Where did you people come from?"
Are you
Yeah, just
serious?
like, I don't know if they just came out of the ground. I don't know.
Wow.
Unbelievable. But we go wheels up, we got all this mess, and I'm just standing there looking to myself like, we've got a huge mess on our hands here. So when we land in Bagram, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes later, that ramp goes down, and I see more stars than I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, there's like a 2-star, a 3-star, 3 sergeant majors, a
Yeah.
CW5, God knows how many field grade officers. They're all just standing there looking at me and basically giving me the what in the unholy, what just happened here.
Yeah.
And so I go down and go, report to this, 1 star, I think is the guy I ended up talking to. And I gave him the whole story.
Yeah.
A piece that I left out, by the way, I did leave this out. When we were back on the aircraft, I went up to the pilot and said, that age 64 escort we've got has white phosphorus rockets. I know this because I'm a FSO. So y'all need to blow these containers in place, and whatever we left behind needs to get blown in place. And they're like, "Okay, you say so. You cleared the as a ground commander. You clear it. We blow it up. No questions asked."
Yeah.
So I left that part out because when we land, I have to explain, like, you expended white phosphorus rockets on U.S. government property, and it's like, well, I did, but it was the right thing to do. And some sober-minded people were all sitting there saying, yes, what you did do the right thing. The whole situation was terrible, and you did the right thing, Lieutenant. Have a nice day. Move out. And
Wow.
so I report into my battalion, who's been marshaling there at Bagram for the last couple weeks as we kind of
Hmm.
collapse in on Bagram before we go home. And my battalion XO, who's he has one of those funny moments where he just looks at me and says, "Raj, you did the right thing by recovering this equipment. You did the right thing by your unit, by the U.S. taxpayers. You've done good work here. But my life would be so much easier if you would have just blown the whole container, and we could have just made the whole container be like a write-off. Because that's why we do
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
1750. You stick on the door, right? You just say, hey, here's everything that's on it. If the whole trailer's lost, then you're like, oh,
Yeah.
combat loss. But because we recovered so much of the stuff, we had to go through line by line, serial number by serial number.
Yeah.
And he was like, you did the right thing, but I hate you so much right now, and you don't even understand. And knowing what I
Yeah.
know now, I was like, man, I just made so much work for this guy.
Oh
So
my
that
God,
that
that's
was the
funny.
time I blew up a sensitive items container with white phosphorus rockets. So
But not
so
everybody can say they did that. That's for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So my last memory of Afghanistan, which is not a good one, was a couple days later. We are basically, we're done. We've turned in whatever
Hmm.
equipment. We're starting to file guys out of here, and so it's a C-17, which is the big bird. We're
Hmm.
we're flying guys through Manis Air Base in Kyrgyzstan, which I'm pretty sure is shut down now. Um, I'm on, again, one of the last Freedom Birds that's flying out of Bagram to take guys home, and the air, like I said, they were pulling assets out of the Afghan theater to go to Iraq. So
Hmm.
these aircraft are getting fewer and fewer and fewer, and so things are having to get more and more consolidated. And the day that I was supposed to leave on my Freedom Bird was this was mid-March 2006. There was a Army Reserve unit that had been operating somewhere in the area. They weren't with us. They were reserve folks. I'm not sure which state they were out of, but had a bad IED experience a day or so prior and had lost like 5 or 6 people.
Ooh.
So the only priority, I think this is still true, but the priority for aircraft was getting caskets out of
Mm.
country. I mean, that's just first and foremost.
Yeah.
Caskets take primacy first and always. And so
Hmm.
my leadership decided, well, we're trying to get guys out of here as fast as possible, and these flag draped coffins take primacy. So they decided to put those on our bird, and so we had so much equipment that was already on the bird when they brought these caskets on there. It was so cramped for us, so we had to like put our feet up on these caskets. They didn't have flags on them yet, but
Yeah.
so that was my Freedom Bird out of Afghanistan, was on an
Holy
aircraft
cow.
with a whole bunch of caskets. So I mean, that's just kind of the breaks that you get sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as
Man,
much as it sucked, it could always be worse. You could be in one of those caskets, right?
that is true. That is true. But it's definitely one of those kind of awing moments when you're looking down and you're like, oh my God, like I'm leaving. I've been here a year. This could have easily been me.
Yeah. And we had lost a few guys in our battalion for that
Hmm.
rotation too. So yeah, so we flew through Manus and landed. We flew through Manus, landed in Germany, got on civilian aircraft, it charter. So it was a,
Hmm.
I mean, the chartered aircraft. They were
Yeah.
CH, or not CH, 747s or whatever, but
Right.
they weren't Delta. They were just private.
Hmm.
And we flew through Shannon, the international airport there in Ireland, and we landed
Hmm.
on St. Patrick's Day.
Oh,
And
no way.
I know, and of course, we didn't get to have any fun, is the short version. The leadership was like, nobody gets to have a single drink, not one, not because it's St. Patty's Day. It doesn't matter. No. General order number 1 is
Uh,
still in effect. I just remember after all that, I was like, y'all are not going to let me have a single Guinness on St. Patty's Day in Ireland, man. So, I mean, we didn't get to leave the
That's
airport. It's not like we were going through town or anything, but
well, true.
it would have
But
been
still, I
symbolic.
mean, it would have been nice, you know.
Would have been nice for that transatlantic flight to have a Guinness. You know, most of us hadn't had anything to drink in 4, 5, 6 months since we
Yeah.
got on our R&R. So, uh, but yeah.
Wow.
So
So,
my
what was the homecoming like whenever you got back?
I was single. So I was very happy to see my folks and my big sister. And
Hmm.
after every when I came home from every deployment, whether it was on R&R leave or actual redeployment, I always
Hmm.
made them take me to Bojangles, Ricky Tech, because that's all I wanted was some Bojangles French fries and a 2-piece dinner.
Yeah.
So Bojangles.
Hey, Bojangles
It
is
was
where
bow
it's
time.
at. Yeah.
So
Got
this
good
spot
food.
brought to you by Bojangles. There you
Yeah.
go.
So, you make it back, redeploy, come back, and
Yep.
then how long are you there before you went to Iraq?
Yeah. So March, we get back, St. Patty's Day of
Hmm.
2006, mid March, and then I'm home for a full year. I think we leave. I want to say 13 months. I think we left for Iraq the
Okay.
following April. So for that 12 months, it's kind of the usual what we call the Army Force generation, which is you lose a bunch of people through retirement,
Hmm.
PCS, ETS, etc., and then new people show up, and then you do your big train up together. So individual training followed by collective training and
Hmm.
culminating in a big validation for company, battalion, brigade, etc., and then you deploy. So all the normal stuff. For
Yeah.
me, I did because I still wanted to go to Ranger School. I went and did the 82nd Airborne pre-Ranger training, and I did it in August, which is pretty rough stuff, just because it's so miserably hot. It's awful. Oh God, it was awful. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, to be honest.
Really?
Went and did that, got honor grad, and then I had injured one of my feet during the training, and so I was like, hey, you're supposed to, when you do the training and get certified, you're supposed to go to the next ranger class, which is I don't know, like 10 days later or something. It's real short.
Yeah.
It's go eat pizza and ice cream for a week and then calorie up and then go head down. And I had to defer that one because I wasn't physically ready. I delayed that and then tried to go the next round, which was in the fall, and I broke my leg on a jump, which was a thing that I'd asked my battalion commander, like, "Hey, sir, I'm leaving for Ranger school in 4 days. Can I sit this one out?" And he looked at me like I was like the scum of the earth. Like, how dare you, try to get out of. He turned out to be a pretty bad commander, which in retrospect all makes sense now. But he basically told me I was a
Yeah.
bad person because I didn't want to do something very risky immediately before going to a very physical school that I
Oh.
ended up breaking my leg on. um, Me and about half the
So,
guys in my jump all got injured pretty bad. It was a jump that shouldn't have happened, but
whoa.
yeah.
Usually, if it's something that bad, somebody's getting relieved.
Yeah, I mean, it was, well, nobody got relieved for that, but this is funny. So, artillery battery, right? We had a SOP in this unit for if you we drop the artillery, the howitzers, we drop them out of the airplane on the first pass. So you're young paratrooper sitting in the C-130 and you get to watch or C-17, whichever, and you get to watch these howitzers fly out the back of the C-17. It's like, man, that's so awesome, cool. And then the next pass you jump out. Oh, it's awesome. We mark our guns, the big guns. We mark them with red chem lights. So if you're on gun one,
Hmm.
that's one chem light. Gun two, two chem lights. We'd usually only do two guns for a package like that. However, if you get injured, you also are supposed to pop the red chem light that you have, duct taped to your 100 mile an hour tape to the frame of your rucksack. You pop that
Right.
red chem light, and that's how the medics know to come look for you. Well, again, a lot of guys got hurt on that jump that night, and myself included. So I hit real hard. I know immediately something's not right. I reach down and feel I don't have any compound fractures, so I'm like, oh, thank God. I know I'm in pain, but
Hmm.
there's nothing sticking out, which is a good thing. So I kind of lay there for a minute, take a couple deep breaths, and then I pull my rucksack to myself so I can get I pop my releases and get the parachute free, from my harness, and then I get my
Hmm.
rucksack and I stand up. I'm like, very gingerly, because I'm in pain. I mean, there's no question, but very gingerly stand up, because you take bumps and bruises when you jump. It's kind of the cost of doing business. So you're used to hobbling around sometimes. And I stand up and feel something in my lower left leg slide. And I was like, and then I just collapsed to the ground. I'm like, yeah, I'm done.
Oh my God. You felt the bone
yeah.
shift.
So it ended up being a clean break. It didn't stay a compound fracture. So, it could have been a lot worse. And it would be a lot worse for some of the other guys that I was in later on when they put me in we called it the FLA, which is, I don't know, the Humvee ambulance. I can't remember what it stands for now. I'm laying there feeling sorry for myself. Ooh, my leg is, I have a minor fracture in my leg. I feel so bad for myself. And I'm looking at the guys to my left and my right, and I'm like, maybe I should shut up, because, we've got a broken femur here, a broken pelvis here. I have a guy whose foot was so dislocated that it was basically just dangling. And I was like, oh man, these guys got it a lot worse than me. Maybe I should shut up.
Holy cow.
But the funny thing about the gun, so I'm like, all right, I'm tapping out. I pop my red chem light, the red chem light of shame.
Yeah.
And I'm laying there, and I hear we're out on Sicily drop zone, which is just this massive grass field. It's drop zone. And I hear the in the dark, which means, there's people like shuffling up to you, and I hear and they get up to me, and they're like, hey, is this gun one? And I was like, no. And I was like, no, it's not gun one. And I hear, hey, sir, is that you? I'm like, yeah. You okay? I think I broke something, but I'm actually okay. Just drive on. They're like, oh man, that sucks. So do you know where gun one is? I was like, man, if that's not the most 80-second thing that's ever, because I mean that's the kind of mentality you're supposed to have, right? Because if this were a real combat operation, like, people are going to die, and I mean, you have to just push past it, and you can deal with it later. So I just kind of laughed to myself, because that was the correct response. I mean, even though I'm laying there feeling sorry for myself, right? Oh, woe is me. So anyway. So I end up not getting to go to that ranger class, unfortunately, because I'm laid up. But anyway, fast forward, 9 months later, it's time to go for Iraq. I'm fine. I mean, I'm back in, running shape at that point, because, when you're in your 20s, you can heal. You're like a lizard, right? Everything heals and grows back.
Yeah.
So we leave for Iraq, and this could be a much longer story, and I'll keep it short. But it's a 15-month deployment. I deploy with my artillery headquarters. I'm going to give the short version. Maybe someday we can drink.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the full story on this. But
that sounds good.
But the short version is, my irreverent sense of humor gets me in trouble with the battalion commander, who told me I was a terrible person for wanting to jump before. My irreverent sense of humor got me in trouble, and he basically fired me, which I didn't know was a thing. And said, you can't be here anymore. You got to go somewhere else. And like, we're a week into a 15-month deployment. And I'm kind of flabbergasted. Like, I didn't even know you could do that. So,
wow.
Again, my sense of humor was, I did something that was silly and goofy and mildly disrespectful, but I didn't deserve what happened to me. But
yeah.
Anyway. So what they ended up doing, him and the other battalion leadership ended up basically forging a counseling packet on me, because I was like, you can't fire this guy when he's got a sterling record. He's squeaky clean. He's never done anything wrong. Like, there's no way you can't do this unless you create a counseling packet and forge his signature and backdate it and do all, really illegal and immoral and unethical things. Well, then you have a counseling packet. So that's a thing that happened that would eventually get expunged by the inspector general, but that's in the future. So he kicks me out of the battalion, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I walk up the street to the brigade headquarters. Again, this is a week into a 15-month deployment, right? And so I show up and report into the brigade executive officer, who I had a good relationship with from the previous Afghanistan deployment.
Yeah.
Had a good reputation. I was like, sir, I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. He was like, I'll find somewhere for you to work. Just go sit in the corner and color with the Marines. And too soon? No? Okay.
That was perfect. All right. No, that's good.
So he puts me in the S9 section. What's an S9, you ask? I didn't know either. So it was the civil affairs staff section
Uh,
within the brigade headquarters. So what is civil
gotcha.
affairs, you ask? I still haven't figured it out after doing it for half of my career, but the short version is back then in Iraq, our job was to do most of the interface with the civilian population and, kind of
Hmm.
represent the brigade leadership and just make nice with the locals. And so they would, not put bombs in the roads and kill paratroopers. So that's the short
Right.
version. So they put me in the S9 section under some major who had just himself arrived in theater and had not trained up with the brigade or whatever. He'd kind of met the unit in theater. And so he was brand new and had nobody working with him. And so they said, "Hey man, we've got this." I was a promotable lieutenant at the time. I hadn't even pinned my captain on yet. And the brigade leadership was like, "Hey, we've got this guy. He's got some weird baggage going on right now, but he's more or less a good dude. And do you need the help or not?" And he was like, "Please God, I'll take the help. I'll take my help." So he was like, "If I have to put him in handcuffs, just issue me some handcuffs." So I ended up working for this guy, and it turned out to be, life lessons, right? At the time, I thought my life was over, my career is over before it's even begun. Like I
Right.
haven't even
Yeah.
been captain yet, and I'm totally screwed. And I mean, not only is my career hosed right now, but I mean, like, it's the surge, it's Iraq, everything is going to ish around us. I don't
Yeah.
have faith in my leadership right now. I have no idea what is going to happen with my life right now. And God had a different plan for me, far beyond anything I could have ever even. I mean, you couldn't have if
Yeah.
you would have drawn this up, in some screenplay. The execs would have rolled their eyes and been like, "Oh, come on, man, really?" So working for this guy turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me. So he, first of all, took me in, no judgments.
Hmm.
He was like, I don't really care what happened down the street there. Frankly, I don't even care. So today's a new day. When he was a major, I was a lieutenant, so very senior to me,
Yeah.
and he was like, today's a new day. We're just gonna push forward. Let's do this. And so for the remaining 14 months, he taught me how to be a civil affairs officer. So I dropped my packet to become a civil affairs officer while I was in Iraq and got
No
approved.
kidding.
Yeah, so things were different back then. Now there's selection and
Yeah.
there's a very different process now. But back then, basically, you just had to do a paper board. So a board would look at your
Hmm.
packet and say, is this person good or bad? We'll see. And I got picked up. So it was a surge, right?
Right.
So they
Yeah. Oh
take
yeah.
just anybody, even me. So I got picked up for that. So we finished out our deployment in Iraq. A lot of really great stuff in Iraq. A lot of really bad stuff too. We lost a lot of people. This was during 0708. This was a surge. We were down south in, I don't know how well you know the area, but so Dakar province. So this
Yeah.
is kind of like the southeastern portion of Iraq, because a lot of people, when you say
Okay.
southern Iraq, they think southern Baghdad, and that's not what I mean.
Yeah.
So um, my job was to go all over the three provinces that we down in southern Iraq. So that would have been Basra, Muthana, and Maysan.
Mm.
One's on the Persian Gulf, one was on the Kuwait border, and the other was on the Iranian border. And
Hmm.
so during this time is when the Iranians were funneling all of the EFP, the copper discs, the explosively formed projectiles. They were funneling all that through rat lines through these provinces to get up into, well, Iraq proper, but mostly in Baghdad, because that's where most of the coalition forces were.
Hmm.
And so we did not have a huge footprint as far as being able to disrupt those lines with combat power, because we were very, 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 very huge swaths of land and very small amount of forces. And
Right.
so we were trying to figure out more uh, kind of indirect ways to disrupt. We weren't going to be able to stop them, but at least disrupt and slow down some of the rat lines of them getting all this material into the theater. And so us as CA people, that's what we were doing, was we were going out and meeting all the locals, trying to get good with the sheikhs. We knew who most of the good and bad guys were. Most of the time it was white hats and black hats, although there definitely were some some of the the sheikhs, the tribal leaders that would play both sides. That absolutely happened a lot too. But we at least we knew who they were and kind of that they were playing both sides, and we could use that to our advantage from time to time.
Right.
But that was what we were doing, was trying to disrupt all of this with very little amount of actual resources at hand, and so you had to figure out really clever ways to kind of get into their planning cycles and disrupt it. And so I got
Right.
schooled pretty young on irregular and unconventional warfare, on how to use some of those tactics against them. So
And now, when you're talking about that, you're talking like you're going out visiting and just trying to have good relationships where they trust you, and then they'll kind of follow. The hope is that they'll help you instead of helping the enemy. Is that right?
Yes, and I mean, there's lots of money getting thrown around, so they're not just doing this because of my stunning good looks and boyish charm. I mean, there's a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
there's a lot of money getting sloshed around. But again, we actually came. I say we, not me, but they came out with a name. They called it the money as a weapon system, and that's exactly what we were doing. Is
Yeah.
sometimes it's interesting because a lot of people don't really think of it in these terms. They think, oh, you just pay people money to pay them off. Yes, that's true. Some of that was happening. Hey, we're going to pay
Hmm.
you and your guys money to go do roadside cleanup. And what's happening is they're cleaning the garbage off the road, so it's harder for them to hide and place IEDs. But wink, wink. We
Right.
also know that that this is in kind of a way, the unspoken rule is that this is the payoff. Just keep your people in check, and it was working.
Yeah.
You could also use the inverse to that, was if we had a particular tribal leader that we were trying to isolate because we knew he was playing either both sides or was just on the wrong side. There was a few of those too.
Yeah.
By paying money to all of the other sheikhs in the area and not him
Hmm.
would make him furious, and you're basically isolating him further and trying to force his hand while meanwhile while we're collecting on this guy and sending that up to the people that need to see it. And so one day black helicopters show up and you never see that guy again. There's some of that going on too. So yeah, you have to be clever like a fox, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So interesting times. We were there at Talil Air Base, which was one of Saddam's air bases, and then we just took it, and so it's right there at the ziggurat of Ur, which for all your historians is mentioned in Genesis. It's in the Bible, and it's pretty impressive thing to just wake up every morning and look out your tent and see the ziggurat right there. That's where Abraham was from.
Wild.
So
Yeah. That is really cool.
Felt like Indiana Jones. I got to climb up it a couple times before they shut it off to the GIs. But
Oh, really? Well, that's cool. Yeah.
Well, we can't have nice things because a couple of guys got stupid, and so they just had to shut it down for everyone. But
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't be the military if you didn't have that. So,
So meanwhile, while I'm deployed, I start courting this lovely young woman who I had kind of started courting during my previous deployment in Afghanistan via MySpace. So that if that's dating all of us here, yeah. So she and I kind of dated casually in between my Afghan and Iraq deployment, but nothing serious. And then when I went to Iraq, we started emailing each other, and things started getting serious and serious and serious. And when I went home on my R&R, I went and bought a big ring and stuck it on her finger, and went back to Iraq, which I did towards the end of I always like doing my R&Rs at the end for whatever reason. So, I went back for about 90 days, and then once, came home from Iraq in July of 2008 to Fayetteville, Fort Bragg, home of the Special Operations and Airborne, and we went immediately to the Justice of the Peace in Fayetteville. Now, where do you think the Justice of the Peace in Fayetteville is located?
Well, I'm going to say probably in Fayetteville, like downtown
what kind
or
of
something.
Building?
I don't know. Courthouse, maybe?
Oh, a courthouse. That's a pretty good guess. No, the Justice of the Peace in Cumberland County in Fayetteville is in the detention center. So, yes, I came home from Iraq and married the woman of my dreams in a prison. So,
very nice.
Yeah. Although I will
Huh.
say, I promised her we would have a beautiful wedding, and we did. So
Oh, okay.
about
Yeah,
five
yeah.
months later, in December, we had a beautiful week before Christmas. Late fall,
Oh,
early
nice.
winter
Yeah.
wedding there on the main post chapel of Fort Bragg.
Very cool.
So I redeemed myself after marrying her into prison. So
Yeah. That's pretty funny that that's the prison, though. I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, if you've been to Cumberland County, if you know, you know. so so we're
That's too
newlyweds.
funny.
Yep, it's December of 2008.
Yeah.
We get married. I owned a home here in Fayetteville, so we got married, and she just moved right in, and then we immediately packed up half of our stuff and went down to Fort Benning, Georgia, for 6 months to go do the captain's career course
Mm, yeah,
for
yeah.
the maneuver captain's career course. So infantry armor just kind of mushed together. And so we lived in a little Fleabag, hotel, or not hotel, excuse me, apartment, because we owned a home back in Fayetteville, and we knew that we were going to return to Fayetteville for the rest of the civil affairs qualification course. So we
Mhm.
went down to Georgia for 6 months as newlyweds, met a lot of really great people that we're still friends with today. And 6 months later, come back to Fayetteville, and then I start the civil affairs qualification course. My assigned language is Tagalog, which is the Philippines. It's what I wanted. I wanted an Asian
Yeah.
language, and I didn't want to have to learn characters. And so Tagalog it
Oh,
is.
well. Yeah.
Latin alphabet and everything. They actually
Really?
Filipinos, they actually have less letters than our alphabet, believe it or not. So, like
Huh.
for example, they don't have a Q.
Uh-huh.
So if you want to make a Q sound, it's KW. It's very
Well,
efficient.
it makes sense.
It's very efficient. I like it. So did language for 6 months, just sun up to sundown all day long for 6 months, doing nothing but language.
Oh,
But in Army
that's
Special
tough though.
Operations, yeah, in Army Special Operations, we don't send our people to Monterey to go do the Defense Language Institute and do all the language in beautiful Northern California out on the coast. No, we just do it.
Right.
We do it in the basement of a huge building on Ardennes, drive in Fort Bragg. So you start to forget what time of day it is because there's no windows. It's good stuff.
Well, what better way to teach somebody than to lock them up? I mean, you got married in a prison,
Right?
it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and it was preparing me for SEER school. So
Yeah, there you go.
yeah,
See?
see, it's a glass half full.
Yeah.
So 6 months of language, and then 6 months of just the civil affairs portion of the course. A lot of great people I'm still friends with to this day. I mean, you meet a lot of really great people in the Q course, and it's good time. So 6 months later, I report into the 97th Civil Affairs Battalion, which is all these battalions support special operations units within their respective theaters. So, for example,
Oh, I
the
see.
97th Civil Affairs Battalion, which provided all of the special operations civil affairs to PACOM, now Indo-PACOM. So
Mhm.
that meant we worked very closely with First Special Forces Group, to say the least, and then we worked with. We certainly worked with some of the non special operations folks as well. So PAC Fleet, we worked with the fleet a lot. I believe Seventh was the one we probably worked with the most, and then
Yeah.
a lot of Marines too. So really great stuff. So I did my team leader time. That's kind of the crown jewel of your civil affairs time, is when you do it as a captain on a team. I got to
Hmm.
do a lot of kind of cool guy stuff, but my favorite mission was there's just a CA team is 4 people. However, some missions you end up having less people than that because
Hmm.
that's kind of the constraints that are put on you. So there's only 2 of us. It was me and a sergeant first class in E7, very small team. We went to Sri Lanka and were there for about 10 months. And we were there, I want to say, a little over a year after their 30-year civil war ended. So a lot of wild and crazy stuff going on there
Hmm.
during that period. We got to be
Interesting.
some of the first. I don't want to give a huge history lesson here, but 30 years Tamil Tigers, who are ethnically different than the Sinhalese ethnic majority in Sri Lanka. The Tamils
Right.
are Hindu, and the Sinhalese are Buddhist. So that's kind of the breakdown. The Tamils were kind of the northern third or so of the country, and then the
Hmm.
rest of the southern part of the country and the central were all the ethnic majority government, the Sinhalese. So that's the crash course. So they
Okay.
fought a 30-year civil war to have a separate, separatist movement to become their own country, and it was really bloody and awful. And a lot of the tactics that our Islamo-fascist friends were employing in the global war on terrorism, kind of the forebears of these Islamo suicide bomber
Hmm.
techniques and tactics that were actually things that they had picked up in the 80s and 90s from the Tamil Tigers. So Hindu
No
nationalism.
kidding.
Yeah, so it actually kind of goes back. Just a little tidbit of history for that. So we were in Sri Lanka for almost 10 months.
Hmm.
And we got access to a lot of areas because we were there as a civil affairs team. We were not constrained by Leahy, as in Patrick
Hmm.
Leahy, the old Vermont senator. We weren't constrained by Leahy vetting, which means, according to statute, U.S. statute, if there are foreign countries that the U.S. government, particularly the military, are going to be doing joint operations with, or combined
Hmm.
operations rather, they have to pass Leahy vetting, which is when they're looking for human rights abuses, is what they're looking for, and
Gotcha. Okay.
it can be a person. So Commander so and so of the Burmese Rangers can't do this. Okay, got it. Or it can just be a whole unit if it's so widespread that they can't even hang it on a couple of leaders. And the Sri Lankan army fell into that category because there are so many alleged. That's what I'm going to say is alleged. There are so many
Yeah.
alleged human rights abuses in the final weeks and months of the Civil War that the U.S. government was just like, the whole army is off limits.
Wow.
Yeah, it was bad. So alleged human rights. Um,
Hmm.
so we had access to a lot of people and areas because of the humanitarian nature of being civil affairs people that the
Hmm.
rest of the whole U.S. government, or at least military for sure, didn't have access to. And so we were getting into certain areas to be able to see things and talk to people. And there was some specific stuff that we were, looking for that I'm not going to get into here, but
Yeah.
just really
Yeah.
amazing experience to just get out and see this really amazing country and these just absolutely lovely, wonderful, wonderful people. I fell in love with the Sri Lankan people while I was there.
Yeah.
Very sad, just how much they had been through, and honestly still continue to go through to this day. It's just they don't
Right.
deserve the government that they have. Um,
Mm.
just lovely people, but we were also responsible because the embassy there in Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka, was also
Hmm.
responsible for the diplomatic mission in the Maldives. So,
Mm.
quick geography lesson: if you just go straight west across the Indian Ocean, you'll go over the bottom of the subcontinent of India and off into the middle of the Indian Ocean. There's an
Hmm.
atoll there that's a country called the Maldives. It is in the middle
Hmm.
of nowhere, and also very lovely, lovely people. We were responsible for that country as well because the embassy covered both countries.
Right.
So we spent a lot of time flying in and out of Male and going into the Maldives to, kind of get after our objectives and talk to the people
Hmm.
we needed to and go see the things we needed to see and all that. So
And you
really
were there
amazing
for how
experience.
long?
So all in all, the tour was, I think it was just under 10 months, 9 and
Okay.
change. So a lot of back and forth, but between
Yeah. Yeah.
Colombo and Male. And it was very difficult to get out to the outer. It's an atoll, right? So it's hundreds and
Hmm.
hundreds and hundreds of these islands.
Right.
You can't get to all of them, right? And so I mean, some of these islands are so small, like people don't even live on them. So
Mm.
trying to map out this and answer the stuff we were sent to answer was a
Yeah.
challenge, but it was beautiful. I mean, I guess there's worse
Yeah. I'm sure so.
for it.
Yeah.
People give me a hard time back in my headquarters, like, "Oh, he's going to the Maldives again to go have vacation." And I'd always just shrug, like, "You sent me here. What do you want me
Yeah.
to do? I could
You
be at home
told
with
me to
my wife
go.
right now. You sent me here." It's just jealous because one of the other teams was in Bangladesh, which again, God bless the Bangladeshi people, but what a
Not.
miserable country. Just
Yeah. Not a good place to be hanging out.
not their fault, but geez.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, so Sri Lanka, yeah. So did that, came back, did a lot of TDYs back and forth, going to Korea, in and out of pretty much all over Asia. Came back and Went to Leavenworth for a year, that's when I pinned major. Did the
Okay.
major school for a year there at Fort Leavenworth, and then went out to JBLM Washington for a year to do my company command for another Asia centric unit that we ended up inactivating. So they basically sent me out there to
Shut it down.
wind everything down. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
did that for a little over a year, and then went to Korea. And I was in Korea for couple of things happened. So that was during the time that. So let me back up. So I was the deputy G9 for the Second Infantry Division. So again, I was
Mm-hmm.
the S9 before, now I'm a G9. So that means I'm on a general staff, and
Yep.
I'm the civil affairs dude. There's two of us. I was the deputy, but I had a lot of responsibilities even as a deputy. And we're there in Korea, up in Area 1, because we were in the Second Infantry Division. That's another
Mm-hmm.
thing I joke around about with people when they say, like, "Oh, Korea was a huge party," and I'm like, "Not if you were in Area 1. It wasn't a party, I promise." I had friends down in Busan, down in the southernmost part of and
Yeah.
they kept re-upping for an additional year. They're like, "Oh man, I've never had so much fun." And we're up near the DMZ, like, yeah,
Yeah.
not fun up here, I promise. So the South Korean president was being impeached, and so there's all kinds of madness going on, like politically. So there's a lot of unrest and just a lot of wild and crazy stuff going on, and at the domestic politic level there. Um, we were responsible for making sure that the Rodriguez live fire complex, the range that's there, is the
Huh.
only range of its kind in the entire Paycom theater where you can go. Like Marines from Okinawa would come up because it was the only range
Really?
where they could go fire the big guns in the entire theater. So
Wow.
Apaches, Abrams tanks, Bradleys, the big stuff. It's the only one
Yeah.
in the whole theater. So it's a big deal. And
Yeah.
protesters would come out on the range in order to shut the training down so they could, and try to squeeze the Korean government for lickies and chewies, whatever. So basically, the
Yeah.
Americans are kind of over a barrel because the Korean government's not dealing with its protester problem. And so the civil affairs guys, me, are up there trying to help mitigate some of the locals and make
Mm-hmm.
them feel heard and do all some of the huggy feely stuff. But this pretty important though. Uh,
Yeah.
so working on that. Meanwhile, like I said, there's an impeachment going on, and then there's the Trump election, and that's all going on while I'm
Mm.
in Korea. Um, Very interesting to watch from afar, to say the least. But if you fast forward a couple months, that's when the whole like, little rocket man, I've got a button and it works, and I'm gonna. All that was going on while we were in Second Infantry Division, and so we were doing call outs, doing musters at 2 o'clock in the morning just to prepare up in Area 1 for Little Rocket Man to start shooting rockets. And so, like it was a miserable time because we weren't getting sleep because we kept having to deal with alerts and all this.
Yeah.
And where we were up in Area 1, I mean, we know that the North Koreans have that place sighted in. So like,
Oh,
were
yeah.
they to ever to say, you know what, like screw all this, we're just gonna hit the button. Like we knew where we were was gonna be like number 1 or 2 on the target list.
Right.
So it's a very sobering experience when you're in that area of Korea, when like our lives are actually in the palm of the hand of this psychopath, because if he really wants to just go
Yeah.
ape, like we're a speed bump. I mean, eventually,
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll mass our combat power and go over there and just crush him like a grape. But if you were on the
Yeah.
first wave, like, sorry for you, So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're literally, they have you in their sights. There's no way they don't,
yeah. So
Gotta love
little
it.
Rocket Man, he left us alone for that time. So came home from Korea with minimal incident, right?
Yeah.
And came back here to Fort Bragg and did some pretty cool stuff at Fort Bragg for a while. And honestly, that's kind of
Same,
the wind down of my
same type of
career.
stuff. Same type of stuff at
Yeah,
Fort
so
Bragg.
I was in more of a planner role. So at that point, I
Okay.
was pretty senior major. So my job at this point was to help my battalion commander train and send teams out the door to. Now I'm sending them out the door to go do cool stuff. So
Oh, I see.
I'm
Okay.
mostly just watching from afar at this point, which
Yeah.
happens
Yeah.
when you're an officer, I'm afraid. So some really cool stuff, but unfortunately, I'm vicariously living through the cool young captains and NCOs at this point.
Yeah.
So I mean that's kind of the short version. One of the coolest jobs I did on my way out of the army, I got to be a a battalion training officer here at Fort Bragg at the Civil Affairs School, the schoolhouse.
Oh, nice.
So getting throughput, getting people through the qualification course, all that stuff. Really rewarding, amazing job. COVID happened during kind of the second half because I only did that job for a year because I got promoted out of it. Wish I could have done it for 2 but only got to do 1. But when COVID hit, SWIC here, that's what we call the Special Warfare, the school, affectionately known as, I used to make this joke all the time. It's the United States Army John Fitzgerald Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, also known as USAFITSWITZ, or just SWIC for short. Okay. That joke fell flat.
Sorry. Yeah, I went out. Yeah.
Hey,
sorry.
man,
No, I didn't hear any of it.
Your speakers always go out when I crack a joke. I'm starting to catch on to you, AJ.
Yeah. I was, I'm going to laugh hard whenever I go back and watch it. So it'll be good.
So when COVID hits, we, as a collective entity here at the schoolhouse, were told that, we were told, and then we made a plan. We did not stop training soldiers during the first 4, 5, 6 months of COVID. So Army basic training is getting shut down all over the place, and so there's all kinds of log jams that are now being created, and there's throughputs are being affected, and all that. Here we were unaffected. It was figure out a way, if we've got to do some hybrid training or some maybe a little bit of distance learning. Yes, there will be a little bit of degradation in the quality of training, but we are not stopping. And so we had to figure out some clever ways to maintain our throughput of students through the pipeline. And we were able to do that. And then really the last 4 years of my career, I'll keep it real short. I pinned on Lieutenant Colonel towards the end there. I went up to Fort Lee, now known as Fort Greg Adams. That was one of the bases they renamed. And it's the Army Sustainment Center of Excellence. So it's all logistics. I've never been a logistician in my life, but I was the special operations dude on the staff there. So just making sure that my parent headquarters, special operations folks were making sure we weren't getting left out of getting written into doctrine. A lot of the tests and all. I mean, it was a staff weenie job, but it was pretty rewarding. I got to meet a lot of really amazing people, and I got to be an instructor there for the captain. So I taught the introduction to Army Special Operations course for the captains there at the time it was Army Logistics University. Now it's Army Sustainment University. So I did that for 2 years, and then my PCS window came up again. So Fort Lee there was in the Petersburg, Virginia area, so just south of Richmond. And we wanted to stay in Virginia because we were going through the very final stages of our adoption, and we had to move again, and it was just like, let's at least keep it in the same state so we don't have to do all the home study stuff all over again. That's kind of the short.
Yeah, that's a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah, which we had to do when we moved from North Carolina to Virginia, and we knew what we were getting into, so we bit the bullet and did all that. And our agencies, because we ended up having to have 2 because of that, were amazing. And again, maybe over beer another time we can talk about adoption and how amazing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, both of my kids are adopted, so
okay.
I understand it. Yeah.
We have a heart for adoption, and some of that, my wife, that's just how she is. But for me, mine was after being in some of the most miserable places in the world, and just seeing the children, just seeing that just broke my heart. And so we adopted a little guy from the Philippines. So
very nice.
So I was able to use my Tagalog after all, right?
Yeah.
So last assignment was at Fort Eustis, which is the location of U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. So all of the TRADOC, so all of the doctrine and training for the whole Army, everything ends up eventually running through that. It's a 4-star headquarters. It's a big one.
Yeah.
So that's in the Yorktown, Williamsburg kind of general area, real close to Newport News too. It's kind of in that Hampton Roads.
Yeah.
We spent our last two years up there. Again, I was doing kind of a similar job, just being a staff weenie, making sure that Army Special Operations was not being left out. At the big boy and girl table, and then I maintained my instructor position at the sustainment school because it was only an hour down the road, and so once a month.
Oh, nice.
When it was time, I just hop in a car and drive down the road, and so I got to instruct for 4 years, which was pretty amazing. I love dealing with the captains mostly. It was mostly captains and first lieutenants. So
That's
it's
really
really
cool
great
though.
stuff. We loved Virginia. It was fun. We had a blast. It was a workable distance to our home.
Hmm.
Here in Fayetteville, which is where we retired back to, because all our
Right.
families were here. So Virginia was fun. We got to live for that last 2 years. The Navy has a naval weapon station in Yorktown, so we got to live
Yeah. Oh yeah.
in the really nice Navy historic housing, century old housing there, right on the York River, just upriver from that's the Revolutionary War Museum, the
Hmm.
national museum there. It's very close. You're close to the bridge over there to Gloucester, and just absolutely amazing place
Yeah.
to finish up an Army career. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the official part.
I finished out my career here in Virginia Beach.
Okay. No, wow, yeah.
So yeah, I know the whole. In fact, I'm in Virginia Beach right now.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, I'm on Fort Story, so on an army base right now.
Oh, yeah, Fort Story is wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you ever
So
make it over to Mount Trashmore?
oh yeah,
I
been there.
love Mount
Yeah.
Trashmore. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The
There's a
aptly named.
yeah, yeah. It's a pretty cool park, and then they also have that big skate park and
Yeah.
stuff like that. There's really cool. They got some cool stuff over there.
And there's a big Filipino diaspora there in Virginia Beach and Norfolk, kind of both.
Hmm.
And so we go to Phil Fest every year and take our son down there just so he can get his lumpia, and maybe I'd have 10 pieces too myself. So uh,
Well, you got to do that every now and again, so it's all good.
so yeah, so we retired back here to Fayetteville, bought a house, and I officially retired here about a month ago, but I was on
Yeah,
for about 90 days, so I pretty much mentally checked out, this summer. So
yeah, for sure. And now
yeah,
you've got you got the podcast Tracer Burnout.
yeah,
So you're doing that with Dan. And
yeah,
then now are you working anywhere? Or are you just
yeah. I got a
full-time
full-time
retired?
gig downtown. I'm doing some
Okay,
defense contracting stuff. It's again, it's
gotcha.
an office job. I'm not doing any cool guy stuff, but the pay's decent, and we need the money, frankly, so gives me something to
Yeah.
do. And so it's kind of like having two full-time jobs, because I mean, Dan and I put a tremendous amount of time and effort into the show.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
our division
And
of labor, he does all the studio's in his home, and he does
yeah.
all the cutting and editing, and he does all we call it the product. He puts the product together, and I do
Hmm.
pretty much everything else. So that's all the communications, all the social media, anything's
Yeah.
even remotely close to being business related, talking to vendors, all that stuff. That's pretty much me. Although of course I keep him very, read on to what's going on, because it's 50% his company too. So,
Yeah. 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 Most
but
definitely.
yeah, we love it. It's a lot of work, but we love it.
Yeah, you guys are doing good things with it too. I've your interviews are going really well. Yeah, I'm thoroughly impressed, and I'm
Well, thank you.
taking stuff from you guys. So,
Well, thank you. And we love your show. We love your firesides, and I've really come to love your little 60-second hits.
oh, the as I see it,
As I see
yeah,
it, yeah. You're channeling
yeah,
micro on those.
yeah. I've got a lot of I want to say stupidity, but I got to let it out somehow, some way. So it's been fun. I'll say that.
Well, you have a face for radio, my friend.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you for noticing. Oh
So
man,
did
that's
I hit everything?
oh man, you did fantastic. Are you kidding
Okay.
me? Yeah, yeah.
It's
No, that's perfect. I love it.
it was an
Yeah.
interesting career. I get, if I could, just a few closing.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Stupid officers have to go on too long, right? Yeah, I learned a lot throughout the military. I think we all do. I learned a few things without sounding too brown nosy. Something that I learned very, very, very early on, which served me well, was if you don't know something, that have enough humility to actually say
Mm,
that. And that particularly served me well with the NCOs, because especially when you're a junior officer, the NCOs can smell BS from a mile away. And if
it's
you
true.
try to pass yourself off like you know something when you clearly don't, you're going to lose credibility. They're not going to trust you. They're going to just roll their eyes and say he's another West Pointer or another blowhard or another whatever, and they'll just wait you out. So take that as an opportunity to, say, hey, I don't fully understand this. Please show me.
Mm-hmm.
And chances are, and every now and then you'll have somebody who will roll their eyes and say, you probably should have known this, dumbass, which may or may not be true. But more often than not,
Right.
what I found was NCOs genuinely love an opportunity to show off. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but just to say, hey, I've honed my craft to learn how to
Mm-hmm.
do this, and I'm the smartest person in the world on this thing. Give
Yeah.
them the opportunity to show off a little bit, and it's good for them, it's good for you, because you're actually learning how to do the thing, and everybody will usually walk away from that interaction being a little better off. So that's something that I'll
Yeah.
always tell my junior officers, is just humility, right? And kind of coming out of that humility is also just that gratitude. And you've heard me say this a couple times in some of our closing comment
Mm-hmm.
firesides. It's just that gratitude is critical, because if your heart is if your heart is prepped for gratitude, just everything will work out so much better, because your entire worldview is going to be kind of siphoned through that, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
you'll have a better attitude. You'll have a better sense of perspective about your current situation. Yes, even you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling sorry for yourself. Oh, woe is me, whatever. Just if you're coming at it from a place of gratitude, it's going to be a lot better for you, and it's magnetic, right? So it's going to be a lot better
Yeah.
for everybody else around you as well. And I mean, when it comes to that, unit cohesion and readiness, if you've got a few people that are just caustic and ungrateful and just nasty, I mean, you've seen how that
Mm-hmm.
can degrade a unit's effectiveness, whatever kind of unit it is. So
Very true. And quickly too.
yeah. So
Wow.
would I do it all over again? That's a question that Dan and I ask in every single one of our episodes, in the wind up, or wind down rather, right? Is,
Yeah.
all that being said, would you do it all over again? And so I'm asking myself that question now, and the answer is
Yeah. Okay.
a
Well, I'll ask
hundred
you
times.
to
Yeah,
do it. If you get a chance, I mean, would you do it all over again?
absolutely. I mean, it's it's funny. I mean, the I think that I got more out of the Army than the Army got out of me. To go all the way back to the beginning, I was a reasonably intelligent kid. I was fit. I was an Eagle Scout. I had all the potential, but I hadn't really put the pieces together yet.
Yeah.
And if had I not had I was in college, right? So had I not had ROTC and some kind of goal, or something at the end of that pipeline, had I just been kind of adrift, go get your undergrad and then just kind of go figure stuff out, like I honestly probably would have been a complete washout and been, a statistic, right? I would have wasted some time and money and gotten in some debt and done some dumb stuff, and just ugh. And I probably would have eventually figured it out. I mean, I'm confident that but the Army was good for me. And even though that landed me in some combat and some pretty traumatic experiences, and to this day I'm still working through a lot of the things that I've done and seen. But I'd like to think that I did it for all the right reasons. And as much as the American people piss me off sometimes, they're worth it. I mean, that's why
That's
we do
true.
this,
Yeah.
right? We do it.
Very
We do.
true.
We do it first and foremost for the men and women to our left and our right.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when you're getting blown up, abstractions about the Constitution and freedom don't really mean that much to you. I mean, when it comes down to brass tacks, you're doing it to that person to your left and your right, because you're all in it together, and that's going to be the person that's hopefully going to help bring you home, and vice versa, right?
Yep.
Um,
Very true.
but at the same time, I mean, we and this is where our military is different from others, is we swear an allegiance to the Constitution, not to a
Mm-hmm.
leader, not to a political party, not to any of that. We don't even really do it to the people. I mean, it's to the Constitution
Right.
and the ideals that represents. And I think that's important. It makes
Absolutely.
it makes us different. So I would do it all over again, even though it wasn't always so good. They call it the service for a reason, right?
Yeah, that's true. It's not all perfect, and there are some crappy times. But I've got to say, when you look back over all of it, good times outweigh the bad times.
Fair enough. Well, you got anything else for me, brother?
No, that's it. Hey, I want to say thank you again one last time. You rock. I'm just do my outro here, and then we'll be done. But to all the listeners out there, if you're struggling, you need help, anything like that, don't forget the VA does have some great resources. You can always dial 988, press option 1. You can text 838-255, or go to veteranscrisisline.net, click on that chat icon. Any of those options are going to put you in contact with somebody that can help you out. But remember, one veteran life lost is one too many. So please, please reach out for help. And if you're out there, you're not struggling, reach out to your buddies that you serve with, ask them how they're doing. And if they need help, give them that helping hand. All right. With that, Roger, thank you. I appreciate it. To all the listeners, stay motivated, change your socks. All right.